The first sound that morning wasn't the song of birds or the soft hum of my coffee maker. It was my phone's cold metallic buzz, a bank notification. Withdrawal $43,000. For a few seconds, I stared at the screen, waiting for my eyes to adjust, for the number to shrink, for logic to explain what my heart already knew. It didn't. The numbers stayed. The digits that represented 35 years of teaching, saving, clipping coupons, and saying I'll buy that next month. I froze in my kitchen, surrounded by the quiet hum of a life built on discipline and faith. My teacup trembled in my hands. "No," I whispered, as if saying it out loud could undo what had been done. I am Evelyn Moore, a retired English teacher, 56 years old, born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia. And that morning, I discovered my only daughter, Jasmine, had stolen my life. Jasmine had always been the bright one, the girl who could charm anyone, the child every teacher adored. When her father died in a car accident when she was 16, I poured everything into her time, money, dreams. I taught at a public high school daily and graded papers until midnight to send her to college. When she graduated, I cried so hard the other parents thought I'd lost my mind. She was my reason for everything. But motherhood, I've learned, doesn't protect you from betrayal. Sometimes it closes your eyes to it. I scrolled through my phone again, praying it was a glitch. Then my finger paused on something that made my stomach twist. Instagram. There she was, my daughter wearing a white sundress, glass of champagne in hand, standing in front of turquoise ocean water. The caption read, "Finally living the dream. Bahamas, hatch, no regrets." Behind her stood Tyler, her husband of 2 years, a man I had never trusted. He had the kind of smile that never reached his eyes and the charm that smelled like danger. And there, sitting beside them, was Tyler's mother, Linda Green, draped in silk, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. 3 champagne glasses. 3 thieves. My knees nearly gave out. I sank onto the nearest chair, clutching the phone as if it could explain why. Hadn't I just spoken to Jasmine 3 days ago? She had called me crying, voice trembling, telling me their apartment had flooded, that they'd lost everything. "Mama." "I hate to ask this," she said through sobs, "but we need help with the deposit for a new place. Tyler's car broke down, and the landlord threatens to kick us out." The tears in her voice broke me. She'd sounded desperate, scared. And I, like every mother whose heart still beats for her child, had caved. "Okay, baby," I'd said softly. "I'll add you to my account for a few days. Just promise me you'll be careful." She'd gasped with gratitude. "Oh, Mama, I'll pay back every penny, I swear." I remembered smiling through tears, my good girl. Looking at her in that picture laughing in the Bahamas, I realized I hadn't been helping my daughter. I'd been funding her betrayal. The flood fake, the car trouble fake, the emergency all lies. The more I stared at the photo, the more my chest tightened. How do you process it when you realize your child sees you not as family, but as a wallet with wrinkles? I didn't cry. Not yet. Grief comes later, after the shock. First comes the fire. My mind raced. Should I call her, the police, the bank? But the image of her smiling with Tyler stopped me. She wasn't afraid of getting caught. She was proud. "Sometimes you have to treat yourself," the caption said. Treat yourself. With my retirement fund. I laughed. An ugly, hollow sound echoed through my empty kitchen. For the first time in my life, I understood what it meant to feel furious and heartbroken at the same time. I walked into my living room, the walls filled with photos of Jasmine at every age. First ballet recital, high school graduation, her wedding day. Each frame is a reminder of love freely given. And now I saw something else behind those smiles: entitlement. The kind that grows when a mother gives everything and never demands accountability. I had raised my daughter to believe she was loved unconditionally. But I hadn't taught her that unconditional love doesn't mean without consequence. That was about to change. The phone buzzed again, another notification. Withdrawal $12,000. My breath caught. She wasn't even trying to hide it. In 48 hours, over $90,000 was gone. Something inside me hardened wholly and quietly. I wasn't Evelyn the teacher anymore. I wasn't the soft mother who believed every excuse. I was a woman who'd been betrayed, and women like me don't just sit back and cry. We build storms. I called the bank, froze every account, and set new alerts. The manager on the other line sounded sympathetic but powerless. "She's listed as co-owner Mrs. Moore. You gave her permission. It's technically legal. Legal, but not moral." When I hung up, my reflection stared back at me from the window, eyes red, jaw set. For years I'd taught my students Shakespeare. Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. I used to think that line was about love. Turns out, it's about betrayal. That night I didn't sleep. I sat at my dining table with a cup of cold tea, replaying every moment I'd missed, the hesitation in Jasmine's voice, the way Tyler had smiled too easily, Linda's smug expression at the wedding. How many red flags had I ignored? When dawn broke, I whispered to the photo on the mantel, "You wanted my money. You can keep it, but you won't keep your freedom." It wasn't rage anymore. It was resolved. I opened my laptop and typed private investigator, financial fraud, Atlanta. And that was the moment I stopped being the victim. That was the moment I became the storm. If you're reading this and you've ever been betrayed by someone you raised, loved, or trusted, don't stay silent. Don't let guilt chain you to pain, because sometimes the hardest thing a mother can do is fight back. For 3 days, the house stayed unnaturally quiet. No phone calls, no apologies, no explanations. The clocks ticking on the kitchen wall felt louder than it had in years, like time was mocking me. Every sound reminded me of Jasmine's laughter, once bright, now poisoned by deceit. By the third night, I'd memorized the pattern of shadows that fell across my living room. I hadn't eaten properly since the day I froze my accounts. My appetite was gone, replaced by a tightness in my chest that refused to ease. Anger is heavy, but silence is heavier. On the morning of the 4th day, I decided to act. Atlanta's spring air was humid, thick with the scent of magnolias, but I didn't notice. I drove downtown to meet Robert Hayes, the private investigator I'd found online. His office was a cramped space above a pawn shop, metal blinds half-closed, a coffee maker that had seen better decades. He stood when I entered, mid-50s, graying beard suit, 2 sizes too big, eyes sharp as razors. "Mrs. Moore," he greeted, extending a hand. "You said on the phone that your daughter may have taken a lot of money." I sat across from him. "Not may have. She did. $43,000, and that's just what I can prove." He took notes on a yellow legal pad. "Family theft cases are tricky. If she had permission, it would get messy legally. But morally..." He looked up. "That's another story." I met his gaze. "I don't care how messy it gets. I want the truth, and I want them stopped." He nodded, flipping open a folder. "Tell me everything." And so I did. I told him about the phone call, the fake flood, the withdrawals, and the photos from the Bahamas. I told him about Tyler, how he'd always looked at Jasmine like a business investment, not a wife, and Linda with her perfume that could choke a room, and her disdain for anyone who worked for a living. Robert listened without interruption, occasionally tapping his pen against his pad. When I finished, he leaned back. "This isn't just your daughter acting out. Tyler's involved. Maybe the mother-in-law, too. I've seen this before, emotional manipulation paired with financial grooming." "Financial grooming," I repeated. He nodded. "People like Tyler find someone who loves deeply like your daughter and teach them to exploit someone who loves even deeper like you." The words hit me harder than I expected. My daughter hadn't just betrayed me. She'd been trained to. Robert promised to start digging. "Give me a few days," he said. "I'll see where that money went." As I left his office, the afternoon rain began to fall, slow at first, then relentless. The windshield blurred into streaks of silver as I drove home. I replayed one sentence. "People like Tyler teach others to exploit love." How many times had I mistaken manipulation for love in my life? My late husband David had been a good man, but he'd left me with nothing but debt and grief. I'd climbed out of that hole alone, promising Jasmine she'd never want for anything. And now it was as if life had looped back around, testing whether I'd learned anything. That night I opened Jasmine's old bedroom. It still smelled faintly of her coconut hair oil and teenage perfume. The walls were pale yellow with photos of her cheerleading days, prom night, and college dorm friends. I ran my hand along her dresser, stopping at a small jewelry box she'd left behind. Inside was a faded friendship bracelet she'd made me in 4th grade, purple thread, and crooked beads that spelled Mom. I sat on the edge of her bed and stared at it until my vision blurred. Where had that little girl gone? The one who used to say, "When I grow up, I'll buy you a big house, mama with a porch and a garden." Now she'd stolen the porch, the garden, and every dream attached to them. 2 days later, Robert called. "Mrs. Moore, you should sit down." "I already am," I said quietly. I traced some of the transfers. The funds were wired to multiple accounts, but one links directly to a travel agency in Florida, Bahamas bookings under the names Jasmine Green, Tyler Green, and Linda Green. My throat tightened. "So it's confirmed." "More than that," he continued. "Tyler Carter, his legal name before he changed it, has fraud records in 3 states, Florida, Texas, and Ohio, all under similar circumstances. He finds women with access to family money, convinces them to borrow, then disappears after the cash runs out." My hand shook as I gripped the phone. And Jasmine. She's complicit. Multiple calls, joint account signatures. This wasn't a spontaneous decision. It was planned. The word planned echoed in my mind like a gunshot. After we hung up, I sat by the window watching the rain turn the street into a mirror. There's a specific kind of pain that comes from realizing your child didn't just hurt you, they prepared to hurt you. They looked you in the eye, said, "I love you," and meant, "You'll never see it coming." I let the tears fall this time. I didn't stop them. I let every drop carry away a piece of the woman who wanted to protect Jasmine from consequences. That woman was gone. What remained was someone else, someone ready to face whatever came next. The next morning, I went to the bank in person. The marble lobby smelled like antiseptic and false sympathy. The manager, a kind woman named Mrs. Carter, greeted me. "Mrs. Moore, I read your report. I'm so sorry this happened. Unfortunately, since your daughter was listed on the account, I know I interrupted. I'm not here to ask for sympathy. I need copies of every transaction she made." She hesitated, then printed the documents. As she handed them over, her voice lowered. "I have a daughter, too. I can't imagine how this feels." I nodded, clutching the papers. "You don't want to." Back home, I spread the statements across the table. Each line felt like a stab airfare, luxury resort spa, treatments, jewelry. I highlighted every charge, every timestamp, every trace of arrogance written in numbers. Then I noticed something strange. A $4,000 transfer, not to the travel agency, but to a company I didn't recognize, Linden Holdings, LLC. I called Robert immediately. He called me back within an hour. "Good catch. That's Linda's company. She's laundering part of the money through her own business." So it was true. All 3 of them had played me, my daughter, her husband's mother. A family built on deceit had devoured the woman who raised them all. That night I stood in the backyard. The air smelled of wet earth and jasmine flowers, a cruel irony. The wind brushed against my face, and I let anger fill me for the first time in years. Not the kind that burns recklessly, but the kind that builds purpose. I whispered into the night, "You wanted to play games, baby girl. But you forgot who taught you how to think." 3 more days passed before the call that changed everything. It was early morning. My phone buzzed violently on the nightstand. Robert's voice came fast and low. "Mrs. Moore, you need to see this. Check Jasmine's Instagram." My heart pounded as I opened the app. A new post. Jasmine in a silk robe standing on a hotel balcony, ocean behind her. Her caption, "When life gives you guilt, turn it into gold." No regrets. Living my best. Life. I could almost hear her laugh through the screen. But what caught my attention wasn't the picture, it was the timestamp. The post was tagged Paradise Cove Resort, Nassau, Bahamas. Robert's voice came through again. "Good news, Mrs. Moore. The resort partnered with an American bank to secure payments. If she used your funds abroad, we can prove international wire fraud. That makes it federal." I didn't speak. I just listened. For the first time in weeks, a strange calm washed over me. Maybe it was relief, or it could be justice finally cracking open a door. "Do whatever you have to," I said quietly. "I want them to see what consequences look like." That night, I printed every photo, every receipt, every comment she'd ever posted, mocking old-fashioned people who save money. I built a wall of evidence on my living room table, my war map. And as I looked at it, I realized something profound. For years, I'd believed love meant forgiveness, but genuine love also meant accountability. Maybe letting Jasmine face her choices wasn't the end of our story. Maybe it was the beginning of her becoming the woman I'd always hoped she would be. The sun rose over Atlanta like it didn't care that my world had cracked open. For everyone else, it was just another morning. For me, it was the day I started planning justice. I wasn't a police officer. I wasn't a lawyer. But I'd been a teacher for 35 years, and teachers know how to document everything, stay patient, and turn chaos into a lesson. I'd taught kids who lied about homework, cheated on exams, and thought they could get away with anything. Now I was dealing with their grown-up versions, only they were my family this time. Robert and I met again that morning at a diner near Peachtree Street. The place smelled like burnt coffee and old stories. He slid a folder across the table. Inside were printed screenshots, bank records, and a list of Tyler's previous scams. "Your instincts were right," he said. "Tyler and his mother have a pattern. But there's more. I found emails between Jasmine and Tyler planning the transfer weeks before it happened. I felt the air leave my lungs." "Emails?" He nodded grimly. "She wrote about how you wouldn't miss a few thousand. Then once you added her to the account, they planned to move fast before you noticed. It wasn't just greed, it was contempt. The kind that comes when someone mistakes your kindness for stupidity." Robert leaned forward. "The problem is legally you gave her access. That makes prosecution tricky. But if we can prove she intended to steal, if there's premeditation or misuse of funds, it becomes criminal." "So, what do we need?" I asked. "Evidence of intent. Messages, posts, proof she used your money knowing it wasn't hers." He tapped the folder. "That Instagram post was good, but we'll need more." I nodded slowly. "Then let's get more." When I got home, I walked into Jasmine's old room again, but this time not to mourn. I was looking for anything, old devices, passwords, traces of the person she used to be. I opened a drawer and found her old laptop. The screen was cracked, but it powered on. The password, of course, was still Princess Jazz. She'd never been subtle. Inside, I found years of photos, essays, and half-written dreams. But buried in her email drafts was something that made my stomach twist. A message she'd never sent addressed to Tyler. "She trusts me completely. Once the money clears, we can leave right away. She won't even notice for a week. I need to cry a little on the phone." I stared at those words until they blurred. I used to think betrayal was a single moment, one act that broke everything, but no, betrayal is a process. It's built slowly, word by word, until one day it destroys you. I forwarded the draft to Robert. He replied within minutes. "That's it. That's the intent." He said the FBI Financial Crimes Unit could be interested, especially since the transfers crossed state lines. It was out of my hands now, but that didn't mean I'd stop watching. Because there's one thing people like Jasmine never expect from their mothers: that we can learn their games and play them better. I made a fake Facebook profile that night. A simple photo, a friendly name, Linda Harper. Through mutual friends, I followed Jasmine's circle. Her posts were still public, dripping with luxury and arrogance. Every caption was another confession wrapped in emojis. Finally learning to enjoy life. No more stress, no more limits. Some people don't know how to live. Each post gathered likes and praise from strangers. I saved everyone. Then I noticed something new: comments from Cynthia K., who seemed to know Linda Green. Cynthia mentioned a business opportunity in Florida. My instincts screamed money laundering. I sent the profile to Robert. He confirmed it. "Cynthia's connected to 2 fraud investigations. Your daughter's in deep circles, Mrs. Moore." I didn't respond. My heart ached, not from shock, but from exhaustion. How had Jasmine fallen so far into the hands of predators and become one herself? The following week, I received a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer. But something in me, some combination of fear and curiosity, made me pick up. "Mom." Her voice was hesitant, unfamiliar. For a second, I forgot to breathe. "Jasmine. I, just wanted to check on you. You've been quiet." "Quiet?" The irony almost made me laugh. "Yes, well, I've had a lot to think about." "Mom, I know you're mad, but you don't understand everything that's happening." "Oh, I understand plenty," I interrupted, my tone calm, surgical. "I know you lied. I know you took my savings, and I know you think you're untouchable." Silence. Then a shaky laugh. "You're exaggerating. It's not that serious. You stole my future, Jasmine. What part of that isn't serious?" Her voice turned cold. "You always dramatize things. I wouldn't have had to do this if you had helped me more when I needed it." That line, so rehearsed, so manipulative, hit like a slap. I could almost hear Tyler whispering it into her ear. "Goodbye, Jasmine," I said softly. "Next time we speak, it won't be a conversation." She hung up. That night I couldn't sleep again. The rain tapping against my windows reminded me of her birthday. It had rained then too. Back then I'd held her tiny body against my chest, whispering, "I'll protect you from everything." Now I realized I'd forgotten to protect her from herself. 2 days later, Robert called again. "I've got something big." He'd tracked the money trail further. Some transfers had been used to buy cryptocurrencies under Tyler's alias, then withdrawn in cash through a chain of fake shell companies. But there was one fatal mistake. They used Jasmine's personal email to confirm a wire transfer from the Bahamas. "Everything ties back to her," Robert said. "We're building a solid case." I stared at the documents he sent. Her signature, her initials, her approval. No more denial, no more excuses. Still, part of me grieved not just for the money, but for the daughter who once asked me how to spell forgiveness when she was 7. Now she'd have to learn what it meant the hard way. Robert warned me that the next step might move fast. "The FBI might contact you soon. I'll handle the coordination. You stay ready." Ready. I'd been ready since the day that text came through. Withdrawal $43,000. 3 days later, the morning light fell across my kitchen like a quiet omen. I sat with a cup of coffee, the house too still, the clock too loud. Then my phone buzzed again. A text. Unknown number. "You think you're smart, huh? You had to bring strangers into this. You just made the biggest mistake of your life. No name." But I didn't need one. I recognized Tyler's tone, lazy bravado, dripping with threat. I stared at the message until my fear hardened into something sharper. I typed back, "You should be careful, Tyler. You never know who's watching." Then I blocked him. That night I called Robert again, my voice steady. "They know I've started something." He sighed. "Let them. The more nervous they get, the more mistakes they'll make." He was right. And they did make mistakes. The next morning, Jasmine went live on Instagram, clearly drunk music blasting in the background. She and Tyler were laughing, showing off jewelry, and toasting with champagne. "People think they can control us," Jasmine said, slurring slightly. "But we took what we deserved. You can't steal what's already yours." I recorded every second, and in that moment my heartbreak shifted into something else, not revenge, but clarity. Because I realized that justice wasn't about punishing them. It was about reclaiming myself from guilt, from weakness, from the woman who once thought love meant enduring pain. I turned off the lights and sat by the window that night, watching the moon drift above the darkened streets. Somewhere my daughter was laughing on a tropical island, oblivious that the walls around her were closing in. And me, I was learning to breathe again, not as a mother broken by betrayal, but as a woman preparing to rise from it. The storm was coming, and this time, I was the one who called it. The call came at 6:47 on a Tuesday morning. Robert's voice was steady, but I could hear the excitement under it. "Evelyn, it's happening today." I sat up in bed, heart hammering. "What do you mean the FBI finalized the warrant last night? They'll be detained as soon as they land in Atlanta." For a moment I couldn't speak. Months of anger, sleepless nights, and quiet shame coiled in my chest, fighting for air. I pressed the phone closer. All three of them. All three. Robert confirmed. Your daughter Tyler and Linda Green. They're scheduled to arrive from Nassau at 10:20 a.m. I'll pick you up in an hour. My hands were trembling when I stood in front of the mirror. I didn't know what to wear to see your child arrested. I chose a dark blue dress, simple but strong, something that said, I am not broken. The reflection staring back at me was a stranger. Tired eyes, firm jaw, a woman who'd walked through fire and was still standing. For the first time in months, I didn't see a victim. I saw a witness to her own rebirth. The drive to the airport felt longer than it was. Atlanta's morning traffic crawled along the freeway, sunlight bouncing off car roofs. Robert drove in silence. He knew there was nothing he could say that would make this easier. When we reached the airport, the FBI agents were already waiting. Agent Sarah Martinez, tall and calm, greeted me with a firm handshake. Mrs. Moore said we'll detain them once they clear customs. We have their confession from the Instagram Live, plus the email draft. It's airtight. I nodded, gripping my purse tightly. I don't want to see them hurt. Just held accountable. You have my word, Martinez replied. We waited near the international arrivals gate, surrounded by ordinary travelers, families, reuniting business people scrolling through phones, and children bouncing excitedly. I almost envied them for a moment, their ignorance of what betrayal looked like up close. At 10:23 a.m., I saw her. Jasmine appeared in the crowd, tan and glowing, wearing sunglasses and a white resort outfit. Tyler followed behind, swaggering with the self-importance of a man who thought he'd won. Linda trailed them, holding designer luggage like trophies. They were laughing. And then they saw the agents. Tyler Carter. The voice came from behind. Two agents stepped forward, badges flashing. Tyler froze mid-step. What the hell is this federal arrest warrant for wire fraud, conspiracy, and money laundering? What? That's wild. He looked around, panicked, as more officers closed in. Linda Green, another agent, called. You're under arrest for aiding and abetting financial crimes. Her red lips parted in shock. You can't do this. We were on vacation. And then they said it. Jasmine Moore, you are under arrest for theft, conspiracy, and financial fraud. The world stopped moving. She turned toward me, eyes wide, disbelief bleeding into horror. Mom, she whispered. Mom, what's happening? I stood still. My pulse thundered in my ears, but my voice was calm, almost cold. You're facing the consequences of your choices. Mom, please, this isn't what it looks like. She reached forward, but the agent stepped between us. Ma'am, please stay back, Agent Martinez said softly. Jasmine's voice cracked. You can't let them do this. Tell them I didn't mean to. I looked at her, the child I'd once rocked to sleep, the teenager I'd watched graduate, the woman who'd drained my savings while smiling into a camera. I already told the truth, I said. As they handcuffed her, the sunglasses slipped from her face, revealing red, swollen eyes. Mom, don't walk away, she screamed as they led her past the crowd. Please, please don't leave me. I didn't walk away. I stood still until she disappeared. Only then did I exhale. My hands shook violently, but there were no tears. Robert placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. It's over, Evelyn. I shook my head. No, Robert. It's just beginning. That afternoon, the news broke. Local woman and family arrested in multi-state financial fraud case. They didn't use my name, but everyone in my neighborhood knew. By evening, Channel 7 called for an interview. I didn't intend to speak publicly, but when I saw the headlines twisting the story into a family misunderstanding, I decided the truth mattered. I told them everything, how a daughter's betrayal could destroy and rebuild a mother all at once. Not for sympathy, but for clarity. The next few days were a blur of court hearings and paperwork. Jasmine refused to look at me during her arraignment. Tyler tried to smirk through the judge's questions, but his arrogance cracked when they denied him bail. Linda sobbed dramatically, clutching her pearls, calling it a miscommunication. The courtroom smelled like perfume and lies. I sat behind the prosecution table, expression steady. I wasn't there for vengeance. I was there to witness justice being written in my daughter's name. Robert later told me the evidence was overwhelming: wire transfers, recorded calls, and that fateful live stream. Tyler and Linda's criminal history sealed their fate. But Jasmine's involvement complicated things. She might get leniency if she cooperates, Robert said. Testifying could reduce her sentence. I didn't know how to feel. Relief, sadness. Both. All I could think was how strange it was that the same daughter who once wanted to become a social worker would now need one herself. That night, the house felt unbearably quiet. Every corner still carried her presence, the scent of old perfume, the faint echo of her laughter. I sat at the dining table staring at the empty chair. I imagined her sitting there again, eyes full of pride, telling me about her first college scholarship. How did that girl become the woman in handcuffs today? I reached for my tea, but my hand trembled too much to lift it. So I just whispered into the silence, "Was I a bad mother, Jasmine? Or did love make me blind?" A week passed. The story spread beyond Atlanta. Reporters called it a rare case of familial fraud turned federal. Neighbors dropped off casseroles and pitying smiles. Some whispered that I should have forgiven her, quietly kept it a family matter. But those people had never watched their child turn into a stranger with your name on her crime. When the FBI released part of the recovered funds, I received a check, $41,000 out of the original $94,000 lost. It should have made me happy. Instead, it felt hollow. Money could be replaced. The bond we had couldn't. Still, I deposited it. Not for revenge, but because survival demands practicality. Bills don't wait for heartbreak. Robert stopped by a few evenings later. He looked tired but satisfied. "We've officially closed the case against Tyler and Linda. Jasmine's cooperation will determine her future." I sighed. I want to believe she'll do the right thing. But belief and reality aren't always neighbors. He smiled faintly. "You'd be surprised what people find inside themselves when they hit the bottom." After he left, I walked to Jasmine's room again. I'd avoided it for months, afraid of the memories that clung to the air. But this time I turned on the light. The yellow walls hadn't changed. The empty bed stared back at me like a wound that refused to heal. I found an old photo album on her desk, our last family trip before her father died. There she was, 8 years old, holding a melting ice cream, smiling up at me like I was her whole world. I pressed my palm against that photo. Maybe I wasn't her whole world anymore, but I was still the one who taught her what right and wrong looked like, even if she had to learn it the hard way. Later that night, Agent Martinez called. "Mrs. Moore, your daughter requested to see you during her initial debrief." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to say no to protect the fragile peace I'd built since that morning at the airport. But another part of me, the mother still buried under layers of anger, whispered, "Go." "I'll come tomorrow," I said finally. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Jasmine's face as the cuffs clicked shut. Not angry, not defiant, just lost. And beneath that, something else: fear. Maybe that was the start of her redemption, or it could be another performance. I'd find out soon enough. When dawn came, I made myself a cup of tea, straightened my dress, and looked again at the mirror. The woman staring back wasn't the same one who had trusted or forgiven too easily. No, this woman had seen the cost of love without boundaries, and tomorrow she would face the person who had taught her that lesson. The next morning was overcast, the gray that seeps into your bones. The city felt quieter, heavier. As I drove toward the detention center, I rehearsed what I might say, every version starting with anger and ending in silence. The building loomed ahead, steel and glass emotionless. Inside, everything smelled of bleach and stale air. A young officer led me through metal detectors and narrow corridors until we reached a small visitation room. There was a glass barrier in the center, 2 phones, one on each side. For a long moment, I stood there, unable to sit. And then she entered. "Jasmine," Her hair was pulled back, no makeup, her beige jumpsuit too big for her frame. She looked smaller, younger, and terrified. She froze when she saw me. For a second, neither of us moved. Then she sat down slowly, picked up the phone and pressed it to her ear. I did the same. "Mom!" Her voice cracked. It wasn't the confident woman from the Bahamas. It was the trembling voice of the girl who used to wake from nightmares and crawl into my bed. "Hello, Jasmine," I said quietly. For a while, she said nothing. Her fingers trembled on the receiver. "I didn't think you'd come," she whispered. "I almost didn't. I just wanted to explain," she said quickly, eyes darting. "Tyler said it was just borrowing. He told me you'd be fine and had plenty saved up." I thought I interrupted softly. "You thought I wouldn't notice?" Her lips trembled. It didn't go that far. $43,000 isn't an accident, Jasmine. "I know," she whispered, voice breaking. "I know, and I hate myself for it." She began to cry, then quiet, helpless sobs that fogged the glass between us. I sat still. My hands wanted to reach for her, but my mind remembered every withdrawal notification, every lie, every smile on that beach. "I was so lost, Mom," she continued. "After Dad died, after everything, I just kept feeling like life was happening for everyone else but me. Tyler made me feel like I mattered again. By stealing from your own mother?" Her eyes flashed with shame. "He said it was a temporary fix. He said we'd invest the money and pay you back double. I swear I believed him." I studied her carefully. There was truth in her words. Naive, fragile truth, but truth nonetheless. I exhaled slowly. "You didn't just believe him, Jasmine. You thought that love meant obedience." Her shoulders shook. I wanted to prove I wasn't a failure. My chest tightened. For years, I'd pushed her to succeed, be the best, and never settle. Had I made her so afraid of failure that she'd rather commit a crime than admit weakness? We sat in silence for a long while. On the other side of the glass, my daughter looked like a stranger wearing Jasmine's face. Finally, she spoke again. "They said I can testify. If I help, I won't go to prison for long." I nodded. "Robert told me. It's your decision." Her eyes lifted to mine, hopeful, uncertain. "Would you? Forgive me if I did." Forgiveness. That word again. Always the easiest to ask, the hardest to give. "I don't know yet," I said honestly. "Forgiveness isn't a switch, Jasmine. It's a road. And you've just taken the first step by facing what you've done." The guard tapped his watch, signaling time was almost up. Jasmine panicked. "Please don't leave angry. I can't stand it if you hate me." I leaned forward, pressing my palm against the glass. She mirrored the motion, our hands separated by the cold surface. "I don't hate you," I said softly, "but I can't protect you anymore. You'll have to learn what I learned too late, that love without boundaries destroys both sides." Tears streamed down her cheeks. "I'll fix it, Mom. I swear I'll fix everything. I hope you do." And my voice trembled for the first time in months, not from anger, but from something dangerously close to compassion. As the guard led her away, she looked back, once her eyes pleading, full of fear and regret. I turned before she disappeared. If I'd watched her leave again, I wasn't sure my heart could take it. Outside, the air was cold, sharp, cleansing. I stood in the parking lot long, letting the wind bite my skin. Then I drove to Piedmont Park, where we used to walk when Jasmine was little. Back then, she would chase ducks and laugh when they ran away. Now I sat on the same bench, staring at the lake's gray surface, wondering when the laughter between us had died. A woman nearby fed bread to pigeons with her toddler. The child giggled, the sound pure, unspoiled. I looked away quickly because some memories were too heavy to carry in daylight. That evening, Robert called. She agreed to testify, he said, against Tyler and Linda. It could reduce her sentence significantly. I didn't answer right away. Finally, I said, "Maybe that's her first real act of responsibility." Robert hesitated. "She wanted me to tell you something. She said she doesn't expect forgiveness, just the chance to earn it." I swallowed the lump in my throat. That's more than I thought she'd say. "She's scared, Evelyn," Robert added, "but she's starting to see what Tyler really is." I hung up soon after, unable to say anything more, because deep down I knew this was the turning point, not of the case, but of Jasmine's soul. 2 weeks later, the trial began. The courtroom was packed journalists, victims, curious onlookers. When Jasmine was escorted in, she avoided my gaze, but when she took the stand, her voice was steady. She testified for 3 hours about Tyler's manipulation, the promises, and the moment she realized it had all gone too far. Her confession painted a picture of a young woman blinded by love and guilt, and for the first time I saw her not as my betrayer, but as another one of Tyler's victims, different yet complicit. When she stepped down, her eyes met mine. There was no pleading this time, just a quiet acknowledgement of what she'd done and what she was becoming. After the verdict, Tyler received 22 years. Linda got 15. Jasmine is 6 years old with eligibility for parole after 4. The moment the judge announced it, Jasmine closed her eyes. She didn't cry. Maybe she had no tears left, or maybe she was finally ready to face life without lies. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. I ignored them all. Instead, I stood at the top of the stairs, watching the sunlight strike the marble steps. I didn't feel hollow for the first time in a long while. Justice wasn't joy, but it was peace, the quiet kind that lets you breathe again. That night I came home to the sound of rain. I made tea and sat by the window watching drops trace paths down the glass. My reflection looked older, softer somehow. I thought about Jasmine's words. I wanted to prove I wasn't a failure. Maybe she had failed in every way that mattered. But failure was where we both began again. Because sometimes love isn't about saving someone from falling. Sometimes it's standing at the bottom, waiting for they to decide to climb back up finally. 3 months passed. Spring melted into summer, and Atlanta's air grew thick with heat and the hum of cicadas. Life had begun to find its rhythm again, but every rhythm had a hollow note, a space where Jasmine's voice used to fit. I went back to substitute teaching twice a week at the community school. The students were loud, messy, alive, everything my house wasn't anymore. When class ended, I stayed behind wiping chalk from my fingers, pretending the silence didn't sting. Every afternoon I'd come home to the same quiet. The house, once filled with Jasmine's laughter and late-night music, now felt like an old photograph, beautiful but no longer real. The first letter arrived in early June, a simple white envelope with Federal Correctional Institution, Tallahassee, stamped across the top. My hands trembled before I even opened it. The handwriting was unmistakable, looped, careful, like she used to sign birthday cards as a little girl. Dear Mom, it's strange how slow time moves here. The days blur together, but nights stretch forever. I've been taking classes, finance ethics, even creative writing. I never thought I'd say this, but I'm learning things I wish I'd known before all this happened. Sometimes I see women here who remind me of you, tired, strong, still hoping their kids will change. And then I remember that I'm someone's daughter too. Yours. If you don't want to write back, I understand. I think about you every single day. Love, Jasmine. I sat there long, staring at the paper until the ink blurred through my tears. Then I folded it carefully as if it were made of something fragile and alive, and placed it inside the wooden box that once held her baby pictures. 2 weeks later, another letter came. Then another. Each one felt different, less desperate, more reflective. She wrote about her therapy sessions, her volunteer work in the prison library, and how she'd begun tutoring other inmates in reading. I realized I'm still a teacher's daughter, she wrote once. I may have inherited something good from you after all. Those words broke me in ways the betrayal never did. Because somewhere behind those walls, she was rebuilding herself one sentence at a time. Sometimes I'd write back, short letters, careful ones. I never said I forgive you, not yet. But I asked about her classes, her health, and the food. I told her about the hydrangeas blooming in the yard, and how the neighborhood cat had started sleeping on our porch. And though the distance between us stretched miles of barbed wire and regret, our words began to build a fragile bridge. By August, her tone had changed. There was something new in her writing, calm, grounded, no longer trying to justify the past. Mom, I know you don't owe me anything. Not forgiveness, not visits. But when I sit in class and help another woman spell a word she's never written, I feel like you're there. Like I'm finally giving something back. I'm not asking for your love back. I want to become someone you could stand beside again, even from afar. I read that letter under the porch light, cicadas humming around me. And I smiled for the first time in a long while, a real aching, quiet smile. Robert still checked in now and then. He'd become less of an investigator and more of a friend. One afternoon he stopped by with iced tea and a tired grin. "How's she doing?" he asked. "Learning," I said. "That may be enough for now." He nodded. "You did the hardest thing, Evelyn. You held her accountable and you stayed human." I thought about that for a long time after he left. Maybe that's what motherhood was, not blind forgiveness, but the stubborn refusal to stop believing in redemption even when undeserved. In September, I decided to revisit her. It wasn't planned. I just woke up one morning and realized I needed to see her not as a convict, not as the girl who betrayed me, but as the woman she was becoming. The drive to Florida took 6 hours. Every mile felt like revisiting a wound that was finally learning how to scar. When I arrived, the same cold air greeted me, the identical metal detectors and echoing hallways, but this time I wasn't trembling. She looked different, healthier, calmer. Her hair had grown longer, tied back neatly. When she saw me, her eyes widened, and neither of us breathed for a moment. Then she smiled. Not the old rehearsed smile, the real one, the one that used to light up our kitchen on Sunday mornings. "Mom," she whispered through the phone, her hand shaking slightly. "Hi, sweetheart," I said. Her eyes filled instantly. "You called me sweetheart. I never stopped thinking of you that way," I said. "I just needed time to remember how." We talked for nearly an hour about her classes, her roommate, and the books she was reading. She spoke about wanting to study counseling when she got out to help women who'd lost their way. And for the first time I saw hope sitting where shame used to live. As the session ended, she pressed her palm to the glass again. I matched it just like before. But this time, it didn't feel like a goodbye. It felt like a promise. When I returned home that evening, the sunset painted the sky in gold and rose. I brewed a pot of tea and read her last few letters again on the porch. Each one was a chapter of atonement, raw, imperfect, human. And though part of me still ached for what was lost, another part finally understood something deeper. Forgiveness isn't a gift you give once. It's something you rebuild every day, word by word, moment by moment, until one morning you realize it's already there, quietly breathing beside the pain. That night before bed, I took out the old box again. Inside were her baby photos, graduation tassel, and now her letters. I placed them together carefully, sealing past and present in the same space. Then I whispered into the still air of the room, "She's coming back to me just differently." And I slept peacefully for the first time since that dreadful day at the airport. Winter returned before I realized the year was ending. The cold came quietly to Georgia, sneaking through window panes and into the corners of my home. By then, Jasmine had been in prison for nearly 3 years. Her letters still came every month, steady, thoughtful, more honest than ever when free. I read them all, every single one, but I hadn't written back in months. It wasn't anger anymore. It was something more complicated to explain, fatigue maybe, or fear. Because each word she wrote was pulling her closer to me again, and I didn't know if my heart could survive losing her twice. One late afternoon in December, I was baking cornbread when the phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but something inside me already knew. Mrs. Moore, a woman's voice, gentle, professional. "This is Officer Delaney from the Parole Division at Tallahassee Correctional. I'm calling about your daughter." My grip on the counter tightened. She's fine, ma'am. More than acceptable, actually. Jasmine Moore has been approved for early parole effective next month, January 15th. As butter hissed on the stove, I stood still, spatula in hand. Parole. Freedom. I should have felt joy. Relief. Something pure. Instead, I felt a tremor of panic crawl up my spine. "Thank you," I managed. "Does she know she'll be notified today? She listed you as her only family contact." "Only family contact. 3 years and I was all she had left." The words sank deep. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through the house barefoot, stopping at the hallway lined with photos: Jasmine in her prom dress, Jasmine on her wedding day, Jasmine at 6 years old holding her first library card. Each photo was a story, and every story had a moment I wished I could rewrite. What would it mean to have her home again, to hear her voice echo down this hallway, to trust her under my roof? The thought terrified me more than losing her had. The first letter after the parole decision came 3 days later. The envelope was thicker than usual, the handwriting neater, steadier. Mom, they told me today. I'll be released next month. I didn't think I'd cry, but I did. I'm afraid to leave, not because I don't know how to return. Every night I think about walking out those gates. I'd like to know what to do with my first real breath of air, who I'll be when I take it, whether you'll want to see me or not. If you do, I'll understand that forgiveness is possible. If you don't, I'll realize that love sometimes has boundaries it can't cross. Either way, I want you to know I'm ready to live right. For the first time, really live right. Jasmine. I read it 3 times before I folded it shut. Then I sat at the kitchen table, head in my hands, and let the tears I'd denied for years finally come. I drove to the parole office downtown the following week to speak with the supervising officer. Her name was Angela Ford, a middle-aged woman with clear eyes and the calm voice of someone who'd seen both the worst and the best in people. She's done remarkably well inside, Angela said, flipping through the file. No infractions, consistent participation in rehabilitation programs, strong peer recommendations. I nodded, staring at my hands. And when she's released, she'll need a stable address employment within 60 days and regular check-ins. Angela looked at me gently. Would she be staying with you? The question lingered between us like heavy air. Would she? Could she? I haven't decided, I said quietly. It isn't very easy. Angela nodded. Of course it is. But second chances rarely come without complications, Mrs. Moore. Her words followed me all the way home. January arrived cloaked in cold rain. The morning of her release, I woke before dawn. I hadn't planned to go. I'd told myself I wouldn't, but somehow my car keys ended up in my hand anyway. The drive to Florida was quiet. Each mile peeled away another layer of resistance until my chest felt raw and unguarded when I reached the facility gates. At 9:00 a.m., she walked out. She wore plain jeans, a gray sweater, and carried a small box of belongings, a stack of books, a notebook, and a photograph of us from before everything fell apart. When her eyes met mine, the world seemed to hold its breath. Neither of us spoke at first. Then she smiled, tentative, but real. Mom. My throat tightened. Hi, baby. Her voice, older, steadier, broke something open inside me. She stepped forward slowly, afraid the ground would vanish beneath her feet. And then, without thinking, I opened my arms. We held each other for the first time in years. It wasn't cinematic. It wasn't perfect. It was fragile, trembling, real. And in that brief, unguarded moment, I realized that forgiveness didn't sound like music or poetry. It sounded like breathing again after almost drowning. The drive home was long filled with silence and small, careful words. She told me about the classes she'd finished, the job training program that offered her a part-time position, and how she'd been assigned a counselor in Atlanta. When we reached my house, she hesitated at the door. Are you sure you want me here? She asked softly. I looked at her, this woman who had destroyed and rebuilt herself in front of me, and I said yes. But we do it one day at a time. She nodded, tears filling her eyes. One day at a time, she repeated. The first few weeks were awkward. The house wasn't used to her presence anymore. She washed dishes quietly, walked softly, and apologized too often. At night, I could hear her moving in her room, restless, as if afraid to sleep too deeply. But slowly, life began to stretch around her again. She started volunteering at a local shelter, then applied for a job at a re-entry program for former inmates. Sometimes she'd come home smelling like rain and coffee, smiling shyly, and I'd see glimpses of the girl she used to be. One evening, I found her sitting on the porch, sketching something in her notebook. What are you drawing? I asked. She looked up, surprised. You? I blinked. Me? She smiled faintly. Well, not really you, just the way I remember you before everything. You always had this look when you were grading papers, like you were both tired and proud. I used to think that was a strength. I sat beside her. It wasn't strength, Jasmine. It was love disguised as survival. She nodded, understanding more than I expected. I know the difference now, she said quietly. Love gives. Survival holds on. That night, I watched her from the kitchen window, head-bowed sketchbook balanced on her knees, the porch light soft around her. For years, I'd thought I'd lost her forever. Now she was right there, fragile but alive, trying every day to rebuild something neither of us knew how to name. Forgiveness, maybe. Or just the sound of a heart remembering how to open. 6 months passed before I realized I had stopped holding my breath around her. Jasmine had been home half a year, and little by little life had begun to sound normal again, not like the old normal, but something quieter, steadier earned. Every morning she made coffee before I woke. She'd leave a note on the counter. Have a good day, Mom. Sometimes a doodle of a sunflower, sometimes just her initials. Small gestures, but each one felt like a stone added back into the foundation she had once shattered. The house had learned her rhythm again, the way she hummed when washing dishes, the creak of her bedroom door, the muffled laughter when she talked with coworkers on the phone. And though part of me still guarded my heart, another part had started to soften quietly without permission. One Friday evening, she came home with something unexpected in her hands, a manila folder filled with papers. What's that? I asked, setting down my book. A proposal, she said, eyes bright. For a community project. The re-entry program wants to start workshops for families teaching them how to rebuild trust after incarceration. They want me to lead the pilot. I blinked. You, she smiled nervously. They said I'd be perfect for it. I've lived it. The pride in her voice was fragile like glass, but it was there. I nodded slowly. Yes, you have. That's why you should. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't hide them this time. I wouldn't have tried if I didn't think you believed in me again. I wanted to say I'd always believed in her, but that wouldn't be true. So I said something better. I'm learning to. The following weeks were busy for her. She spent late nights writing lesson plans, meeting counselors, and drafting proposals with other mentors. Sometimes she'd ask for my help, editing her grammar, reading her speeches out loud. Remember when you used to help me with essays in high school? She said one night, eyes playful. You'd get so frustrated when I mixed metaphors. I laughed softly. Some habits never die. Yeah, she smiled, but some may be worth reviving. There was an ease between us I hadn't felt in years. Not the blind comfort of before, but the kind that comes after two people have told each other every ugly truth and chosen to stay anyway. When the day of her first workshop arrived, she insisted I come. It was held at a small church hall in downtown Atlanta. Rows of folding chairs, a whiteboard, a coffee table filled with pastries, modest but full of heart. The audience was a mix of mothers, fathers, and young adults, all carrying invisible weight. When Jasmine stepped up to the podium, her hands shook, but her voice when it came was steady. My name is Jasmine Moore, she began. And 3 years ago, I destroyed the person who loved me most. I stole from my mother. I lied. I ran. And still she found a way to help me find myself again. The room was silent. She continued, Redemption isn't a miracle that happens overnight. It's a choice you make every day, especially when no one is watching. As she spoke, her eyes met mine for a moment. No shame. No begging. Just gratitude, and pride, not the arrogant kind that had once burned her life down, but the humble kind that comes after you've walked through ashes and learned to plant again. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. I clapped too, tears sliding down my face before I realized they'd come. Afterward, she found me by the doorway, cheeks flushed. Well, she asked, almost shy. I took her hand. You didn't just speak Jasmine. You healed people. She squeezed my hand back. Including us, I smiled most of all. Life after that became strangely full. Jasmine's workshop became a monthly program drawing families from other cities. Soon she was invited to speak at conferences, then at universities. Her story, our story, had become something people wanted to hear, not because it was dramatic, but because it was real. Sometimes she'd bring home letters from people who'd attended her sessions. One read, "I called my son for the first time in 5 years because of you." Another said, "You made me believe that forgiveness can survive anything." Each note found its way onto our refrigerator held by the magnets that once displayed her childhood drawings. But the most significant change came one evening in early spring. Jasmine came home late, her eyes shining with something more than excitement. She sat down across from me, a folded envelope in her hand. "I got a letter today," she said. "From who?" She hesitated, then smiled faintly. "The FBI." I froze. The FBI. They're expanding their family financial crimes unit. They want consultants who understand both sides, the victims and the offenders. They asked if I'd consider joining as an advisor. I stared at her, speechless. "That's unbelievable." She laughed softly. "I know. The system that once caged me now wants me to help fix it. Feels poetic." I nodded slowly, still processing it. "What did you say?" I told them I'd think about it. "But I wanted to ask you first." "Me?" Her eyes softened. "You're the one who lived through the worst of it. I'll walk away if you don't want me working in that world again." I looked at her across the table. This woman who had once shattered my faith and was now asking permission to rebuild others. And in that moment, I understood something profound. Forgiveness wasn't just about accepting the past. It was about trusting someone with the future again. "You should do it," I said finally, because who better to protect families than someone who knows what it costs to lose one? Her lips trembled and she reached for my hand. "Thank you, Mom." The night was quiet after she went to bed. I sat alone on the porch, listening to the distant hum of the city, the soft sound of crickets, and the echo of her laughter from her room. 3 years ago, that sound had been impossible to imagine. Now it was proof that miracles weren't loud. They whispered. A month later, she started her new position. Her first assignment was helping design victim support training for law enforcement. She came home exhausted, but glowing, her notebook full of ideas. "I feel like I'm finally using what I did wrong to do something right," she told me one night, her voice low but sure. "You are," I said. She looked up, eyes glistening. "You know, Mom, I used to think forgiveness was something you gave me. But I've realized it's something you let me become." And just like that, I felt the last wall inside me crumble. Because she was right. Forgiveness wasn't a gift I handed down. It was a space I'd kept open long enough for her to grow into. That night before bed, I wrote something in my journal for the first time in years. She isn't who she was, and neither am I. Maybe that's the point of survival, not to go back, but to move forward together, carrying the lessons instead of the wounds. And for the first time since the world had fallen apart, I felt peace that wasn't just calm, it was complete. A whole year passed after Jasmine began her new life. The house had changed again, not in how it looked, but how it felt. There was laughter now, not constant, but enough to remind me that pain could be replaced with warmth if you were patient enough. Sometimes I would find her sitting on the porch with her laptop typing notes for a speech or organizing files for her consulting work. She looked peaceful and focused, and now and then, when she laughed into her phone, the sound would drift through the open windows like sunlight sneaking past curtains. I had never thought my home could feel alive again. But it did. Still, the past never vanished. It lingered not as a wound, but as a scar reminding us of what had been broken. One evening in July, I came home from the grocery store to find her waiting at the kitchen table. A thick, formal envelope was in front of her with the government seal stamped across it. She looked nervous, her fingers tracing the edge of the paper. "Mom," she said softly, "I got offered a permanent position." My heart skipped. "With the Bureau?" She nodded. "They want me full-time. In Washington, D.C., I'd train new agents, helping them understand the emotional side of family fraud cases." I froze. Washington. "I know," she said quickly. "It's far. But it's everything I've been working toward." I sat across from her. "And when would you leave in 2 months?" The silence that followed wasn't cold. It was heavy, like two hearts realizing they'd have to stretch across miles again. After she went to bed that night, I stood by her door for a long time. She was asleep, her breathing, even the faint light from her desk lamp still glowing on her notebooks. She looked younger, like that peaceful, almost like the girl she'd been before life had its way with us. It hit me then that every mother's heart eventually learns the same cruel wisdom, that love means letting go even when you've just gotten someone back. In the weeks that followed, we prepared quietly. She started packing her books and notes, labeling boxes in neat handwriting. I helped even when my chest tightened with every sealed lid. Some nights we'd stay up late cooking dinner together like old times. She'd chop vegetables. I'd tell stories from before she was born. Sometimes she'd laugh so hard she'd cry. Sometimes I'd cry without laughing at all. One night, as we ate on the porch, the air thick with fireflies, she turned to me and said, "Do you ever wish things had been different?" I thought for a long time before answering. "No," I said, finally. "I wish they had hurt less, but we might never have learned what love costs if they had been different." She nodded slowly, tears in her eyes. "I think that's why I'm not afraid anymore," she whispered. "Because now I know who I am when everything else is gone." The day she left, the sky was a flawless blue, the kind that feels almost cruel because it refuses to match your sadness. Her suitcase sat by the door and the car engine hummed in the driveway. She hugged me tight like she used to when she was little. "I'll call every week," she promised. "I know you will," I said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Just don't forget to live." She smiled through tears. "Not anymore." As she drove away, I stood on the porch waving until her car turned the corner and disappeared. Then I went inside, sat down and listened to the silence she left behind. This time it was a different silence, not empty, but full of echoes. The echoes of laughter, forgiveness, and the fragile peace only come when you've earned it. The weeks after she left were more complicated than I expected. I missed the sound of her shoes in the hallway, the coffee brewing before dawn, the way she'd hum softly while folding laundry. But I also began to notice something: new space. Not loneliness, but room. Room for her to grow, and for me to remember who I was before motherhood had turned into a battlefield. I began volunteering at the same re-entry program she'd once worked for. At first, I just helped organize forms and serve coffee, but soon I started speaking with the families, mothers with trembling voices, sons afraid to come home, wives who'd forgotten how to hope. When I told them my story, our story, they listened. Some cried, some smiled faintly. One woman whose son had just been released took my hands and whispered, "You make me believe it's not too late." I realized then that Jasmine hadn't been the only one who'd rebuilt her life. So had I. In early autumn, she sent me an old-fashioned handwritten letter like the ones from prison. It smelled faintly of her perfume. "Dear Mom, I'm settling into DC. The job is overwhelming, but in a good way. I met people who still think redemption is rare. I love proving them wrong. Whenever I stand in a room full of agents and tell them that compassion saves as many families as justice does, I feel you standing there with me. You taught me that forgiveness isn't weakness. It's work. And I'm still doing it every day. P.S. I found a little bookstore near my apartment. There's a corner cafe that serves tea that tastes exactly like yours. When you visit, that's where I'll take you first. Love always, Jasmine." I pressed the paper to my chest and let out a shaky breath. The ache was still there, but it no longer hurt the same way. It had softened like a scar that had finally stopped stinging when touched. By winter, I finally booked a ticket to visit her. The night before the flight, I packed my suitcase and stood by the window, watching the moonlight spill across the quiet street. The house, for all its stillness, no longer felt lonely. It felt like a resting place between two chapters, one of pain, one of forgiveness, and the next, still unwritten but waiting. I smiled, whispering to no one in particular, "She's finding her way. And so am I." The train from Atlanta to Washington cut through a misty dawn, carrying me toward a new kind of reunion. It had been nearly a year since Jasmine moved to DC, and though we spoke often phone calls, video chats, letters, nothing replaced seeing her face across a table, hearing her laugh fill the air again. As the train slowed into Union Station, I caught my reflection in the window, older, calmer, maybe even softer. I had spent years fighting to survive heartbreak. Now I was traveling not to fix the past, but to be part of her present. Jasmine was waiting just outside the station gates. The sight of her professional suit hair pinned up that unmistakable mix of confidence and warmth hit me with a wave of emotion I didn't expect. "Mom," she called, weaving through the crowd. And just like that, all the years between us seemed to disappear. Her hug was different now. It wasn't desperate or apologetic. It was strong, steady, a daughter holding her mother, not clinging to forgiveness, but sharing it. "You look incredible," I said, trying to hold back tears. She laughed. "I learned from you." Her apartment was small, but filled with light. Bookshelves lined the walls, half filled with case files and half poetry. A corkboard near her desk displayed photos from the workshops she'd led families, smiling agents shaking hands, notes scribbled with words like hope and healing. "I love what you've done here," I said. She poured tea into 2 mugs. "It's a work in progress, but then again, so am I." We spent the day walking through her new world, the small park near her office, the old library she'd fallen in love with, the corner cafe she'd mentioned in her letter. When the waitress brought our tea, Jasmine raised her cup with a grin. "Tastes like home," she said. And it did. That evening, she took me to the federal building where she worked. The air inside was cold and polished, the kind of place built for order and reason, but Jasmine's presence somehow softened it. "This is my team," she said proudly as we entered a glass conference room. 5 people looked up, greeting her warmly, younger agents, analysts, and one middle-aged woman who clasped my hand and said, "Your daughter changed the way we see victims, Mrs. Moore." I looked at Jasmine. "You did that?" She shrugged shyly. "We did." For a moment, I couldn't speak. All I could think about was the girl who once cried in a courtroom begging me for help, and the woman now standing before me helping strangers find their way out of the same darkness. Later that night, back at her apartment, Jasmine brought out a folder. "I've been working on something," she said, "and I wanted you to see it first." Inside were documents, research notes, and an early draft of a federal training curriculum. At the top of the first page, bold letters read, "Family Betrayal Recovery Initiative, a partnership between law and empathy." I scanned the pages and my heart was swelling. She had taken everything we lived, the theft, the prison, the rebuilding, and turned it into something that could save others. "You're building something big," I whispered. She smiled. "You once said the worst thing that happened to us might also be the best. You were right." The next morning, she had an event, a national conference on restorative justice, and invited me to attend. As Jasmine stepped onto the stage, I sat quietly among a crowd of lawyers, social workers, and federal officers. Her voice was calm, deliberate. "When I was 28, I made a choice that destroyed my family. I thought money could buy freedom, but it bought me a cage, one built from guilt, shame, and regret. My mother was the one I stole from, and yet she was the one who showed me what real justice looks like." Heads turned toward me and I felt my chest tighten. "She didn't just forgive me," Jasmine continued. "She demanded that I grow. She made me understand that redemption isn't about erasing the past, but transforming it into something that protects others." When the applause came, it was thunderous, but all I could hear was her voice, strong, unbroken, and filled with love. Afterward, she found me outside the auditorium. "You okay?" she asked. I smiled through tears. "You make me proud every day." She leaned against the railing, looking out at the city skyline. "Sometimes I think about that day at the airport," she said quietly. "When you watched me get arrested. I remember your face, calm, almost cold. I thought I'd lost you forever. You hadn't," I said softly. "I didn't know if I could still reach you." "You did," she whispered. "Eventually." We stood there for a long time saying nothing, because sometimes silence is the only language love needs. That night, we ate dinner at her favorite Ethiopian restaurant. She'd developed a taste for spicy food during her time in DC. Between bites, she laughed at herself. Can you believe it? I work with the FBI and still can't make a decent pot of rice. I laughed too. Well, perfection is overrated. When the check came, she reached for it automatically. I've got this, she said. I froze for a second, not because I doubted her, but because I realized how much those words meant now. It wasn't about money, it was about balance, about her becoming whole. All right, I said, but next time I'm cooking. My visit lasted 4 days. As I packed my suitcase the previous morning, Jasmine slipped an envelope into my hand. Open it when you're home, she said. When I returned to Georgia, I sat at the same kitchen table where she'd once confessed her worst sins, and I opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter and a check. Mom, this isn't repayment, it's gratitude. I can never give back what I took, but can honor it. The check is a donation to the Reentry Foundation in both our names, for every family that thinks they're too broken to heal. Thank you for teaching me that justice without love is punishment, and love without justice is blindness. I love you. Always. Jasmine. I stared at the letter until the words blurred. Then I folded it gently and placed it beside the others, the first letter from prison, the parole notice, the job offer. Each is a chapter in the same book, a story that began with betrayal, but refused to end in bitterness. As twilight painted the kitchen in soft gold that evening, I brewed a pot of tea and sat by the window. Outside, the world was quiet, not empty, but peaceful. I thought about the years behind us, the shouting, the silence, the courtroom, the tears, and I realized that redemption isn't a destination. It's a road, long, winding, and sometimes painful. But if you keep walking long enough, you find something better than forgiveness. You find understanding. I looked toward the horizon and whispered, she came home not just to me, but to herself. And with that, I felt entirely free for the first time in a decade.